I'll share my screen.
So good morning and welcome everyone to our grant writing webinar. Please be advised that we are recording today's session, and if you could please put yourselves on mute just to help us with the background noise. Before we hand across to Rebecca from the City of Whittlesea, I'll just let you know that there will be time for a Q&A at the end, but as the webinar unfolds, if you have any questions, you're welcome to put those in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to them. So thanks again for joining us, and it's over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Tammy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's Applying for Grants webinar. My name is Rebecca Ganikoch, Business Engagement Officer for the City of Whittlesea. On behalf of the City of Whittlesea, I recognise the rich Aboriginal heritage of this country and acknowledge the Wurundjeri Willem clan as the traditional owners of this place. To the attendees, we may have met during previous face-to-face economic development business support events over the years, which I very much look forward to hosting again in the future. Nevertheless, despite the current situation, the City of Whittlesea is proud to offer a series of webinars to support your growth during this period. Also, as another reminder, this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on Council's YouTube channel within a few days. The Economic Development team provide a broad range of support services and activities to local business at all stages of their journey and for all sizes. We focus on the growth and resilience of local businesses by offering educational programs like this one to help you work on your business, not just in your business. We also help you get connected with new opportunities, not only through online networking events, but by building a strong relationship with you and using our own vast network of business development organisations to help you get linked in with larger regional and industry-based opportunities. We also have a selection of grants soon to be on offer to businesses. When it's launched, details will be on our website. So we have a grant stream that is currently available and taking submissions, but we do have another one that's been launched, but not yet open for applications. It will be open later on in the week. But please sign up to our business e-news. This way you will have the details sent directly to your inbox. I will send you a link after today's session. Also, a word about today's session. Please note any questions specifically about City of Whittlesea grants should be directed to Council. Our presenter today will be providing general information about applying for grants, which can be used in your applications for Council grants, but a vast range of grants and a vast range of grants from other providers. Please remember that Council staff are here to help you access our grants, so I encourage you to reach out to Council if you'd like some guidance. Other services we provide include free mentoring sessions where you can bounce ideas and troubleshoot any problems you may be experiencing. We can also help you navigate other areas of Council like permit registration and other compliance requirements. We can even help you gain insights into your local market base. Council staff know a great deal about the community, and we are regularly contacted by savvy businesses who use that knowledge to their strategic advantage, which all leads to better services being provided to the community. If you'd like to learn more, please visit the For Business section in the Council webpage. It is unfortunate that many businesses are unaware of the Economic Development team because they miss out on leveraging our offerings. So I encourage you to make the most of it. You are always welcome to give us a call. Let us know what you're up to and what your goals are. You will have my direct details in a post-event email I'll send out after we're done. I'll pass on to Sue and I'll leave you to enjoy the presentation. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we'll keep our fingers crossed that the technology is kind to us all day and or morning anyway, and hope for the best. So as Rebecca has alluded to, Tammy, Atkins and I are here to talk all things grant writing. Tam and I do quite a lot of grant and tender writing. We specialise in strategic writing of all sorts, effective engagement, conversations with purpose. We're hopeful that we can hand over to you a few sort of handy hints and tips that we've learnt over the last few years and some of the current practices around grant writing so that you can hopefully be successful more often than not in your various applications. We did receive a number of questions with the RSVPs, so we're embedding a number of responses to those in the talk this morning, but you're also welcome to add in as many questions into the chat function as you wish, and we will endeavour to get through as many as we can, particularly the interesting ones, but no pressure. What we're going to do today is to go through the grant writing process, and in particular, what you need to do before you put pen to paper. And I think what a lot of people forget is that that's often the bulk of your work comes before the grant is even on your radar as being available. We're going to talk through partnering, budgets, how to measure success, the details of the writing and how to write well, and some of the outcomes, depending on whether your grant is successful or not, and also outcomes in terms of what it means for you and your organisation if your grant does proceed. One of the things that we think is really critical is that grants should support an identified business goal or bring forward projects, including capital purchases. That you don't see a grant and then go, wow, this is fantastic, I better go for this grant, and then make something up. And also you don't want to go for a grant to do a project that takes you off track, that the grants really should align with your business goals. And ideally you have a project in mind and it brings that project forward. And that's something that does trip a lot of people up. There's also a lot to do before you apply for a grant, and what we're hoping then is that we can help guide you through that process so that you are grant ready and not rushing around at the last minute to collect the bits that you need. Where to find grants? There's a lot of information online about grants, and there's a lot of paid sites. And we highly recommend that you look for the sites that are free, because most of those sites will be more than adequate for your needs. All governments, local, state and federal, will provide links to their own grants, and your local government is also a really good source of information to be able to access grants that are perhaps a little less easy to find, and Rebecca would probably be your go-to person to find out what might be available that meets your needs. And again, that's really important because you know what you want, and so you can have an informed conversation about the sort of grant that might meet your needs. Grant Guru is an online platform that you can search. It has some limited free functionality, but is a really good platform to do an initial search. You'll get far more grants than are actually relevant, but it will give you a really good sense of what's available, and you can join up for their e-newsletter and get frequent reminders of grants that are released that fit your search criteria. There's a raft of community foundations, and of course, SBMS, the Small Business Mentoring Service, who is part of the reason we're here today. And their website has a portal with information related to COVID, and that includes all the various grants that have been released for business. So it's a really great one-stop shop of grants that you might be able to access that are absolutely relevant for you here and now. There's a few things that we specifically want to talk about today. So identifying the opportunity, registering your interest online, and attending the information sessions and knowing to expect to need to do that. Making sure you're eligible to apply, and that's a fairly big topic because a lot of people will apply for a grant and will, during the assessment process, be found ineligible and their grant doesn't progress even to an assessment phase. It's a lot of wasted time and effort. We'll talk through developing your grant writing strategy, and so understanding your audience, their motivations, getting letters of support, having the data that you need to back up your claims and your application, doing your budget, which either you love it or you hate it. There seems to be no middle ground on that. Double checking and submitting early, and then the follow-up and feedback process. They're the kind of steps that we're going to talk through, and we'll probably go off on a few tangents with all of those, but we'll see where the questions take us, and we can expand as needed. This is a diagram that essentially provides a bit of a sequence to the grant preparation and writing process. And you'll notice in the chat box, Tammy's put a link up to our handout, and the handout has this diagram in it. So we wanted to talk through these steps and respond to some of your questions and some of the grants that you are most likely to be interested in for small business. And we do know that some of you that are tapping in might be writing or interested in writing for some of the local not-for-profits or community organisations. Essentially, the principles of grant writing are the same. So you still have to prepare, you still have to write a competitive grant, you still have to know what that means. You need a budget, you'll need letters of support, you'll need to get it in on time. So most of what we are going to talk through applies for both community groups and small business grants. The biggest difference is a funder of a community grant typically will want you to do a project that serves your community, and the funder of a small business grant is generally focused on helping your business either succeed or grow. And so there's a slightly different agenda with the funding bodies. That's about it. So in terms of, I guess the 101 of grants is that don't be fooled in thinking that the dollar value of the grant relates in any way to the workload of writing the grant application. One of the things that trips people up a lot is that you might go for a small grant of, $2,000 or $5,000 or even $10,000, and it can take you an enormous amount of time to get all the information together to prepare your grant response. And conversely, you might go for a grant that's, $200,000-$300,000, and it may take you just as much time to prepare as a $5,000 grant. And this comes back to the funding body and their preferences, the way they like to have grants. Sometimes if the funding body is fairly new in this space, they may not be familiar with the information that they do or don't need. And so they'll ask a lot of questions, or they might ask some repetitive questions. And you just go with the flow. That's what they want, that's what you give them. It's also important on that note to remember that sometimes grant questions can seem a little bit repetitive. And so when you're reading a grant for the first time and it seems repetitive, yes, it is. And yes, you will repeat your answers. That the grant assessment team might divvy up your application, and you might have a different person looking at your responses. And so you need to make sure that every response that you provide gives the reader an idea of you, your organisation, and what you're asking for the money for, to make sense of your response. So make sure that you do repeat yourself, but in an interesting way and succinctly. Before you get pen to paper, you've read your grant application, you've got a sense of what they're asking for, you've decided that that does offer you money to do something that is meaningful for your business, that you're not making up a project, that's going to bring forward something that you wanted to do anyway. And you have to check your eligibility. And there's typically a lot of fine print in eligibility that you need to be sure that you do meet all the legal status, the registration status, if you need to have an ABN to be registered for GST or not, or if it doesn't matter, if you need to have support from, say, your local council or from a local division of Business Victoria, you need to make sure that you've ticked all of those boxes, and it's a non-negotiable. If you do not tick off all the eligibility criteria, when your application is first assessed, you will only be looked at in terms of are you eligible or not. No one will read your application and decide, oh, it's a great project, we'll let this through anyway. You won't even get there. So it is really important that you make sure that you've tested all that eligibility criteria. And if you're not certain, get in touch with the funding body and ask them to explain some elements if you're not too certain for yourself, and make sure that you do meet all their criteria and that your project is of potentially of interest to them. It is a sort of project that they're looking for. You do need to make sure, if you're going to apply for money, that if you get the money, that you can actually deliver the grant, as well as resource and put in the time, effort, the people and the money potentially that you said you would. You cannot go for a grant and then realise that you don't actually have the human resources that you need to now do this project. You don't want to say, we'll put in, 20% of the costs of this project, and then go, oh, oops, we don't actually have any money in the bank to do that. You've got to be ready to go, and you would do far better to wait for the next round of grants and get those things in order. Or if you know you're applying for a grant and it's going into a really busy time of year for your business, then go for a grant, perhaps a lesser amount, to do a smaller project, but do the first stage of a project that you're interested in, rather than trying to do the whole lot at once. And that way you can manage the workload as well. And that means your chances are you'll do the project well, you'll have great outcomes, and then when you report back to the funding body, you're going to look good. So they're likely to be interested in funding you again. One of the things that you might also want to think about is how proactive that you can be before applying for the grant. So you need to understand any internal processes that you need to follow. So if you're the boss, if you're a 1 or 2 person business, that's easy. You can talk to your partner or talk to yourself, and you can give yourself permission to proceed. But if you're working for an organisation and you have a CEO, or you have an executive team or a board or a committee of management, make sure they know what you're wanting to apply for. Make sure they've had a look at the grant and that they're happy that you proceed. It is really embarrassing to have a really great grant application and then find out that the boss won't sign off on it. And Tammy and I give you this advice from experience. You want to make sure that you're not shocking your team with an application that they don't actually want to go ahead with, because that's just really a waste of time and just a little bit depressing. Make sure you also understand a little bit about the funding body. So the grant application will be written in a certain way, and it will tell you what the funding body wants to achieve. By them giving you money, they expect to see certain outcomes. So it's a really good time to get your head around what the funding body wants, not necessarily what you want. And that becomes really critical when you start writing your grant. That your words are responding to the interests that the funding body has, which is not necessarily the same lens that you take to your business. And that's where we always advise that you get somebody who's removed from the business, and a critical friend, if they can be genuinely, constructively critical, or somebody who you might know as a colleague whose opinion you trust, who can read an application for you and let you know if it makes sense to somebody who doesn't know your business or who doesn't know your field, that it does make sense in terms of what the funding body wants to know, not what you want to tell them. And that is really 2 different things. You also need to think quite early on about partnering. And so we often, and we did get quite a few questions around, do you partner? What does a partnership look like? We talk about partnerships and alliances and consortia. They're all basically different ways of saying my organisation will play nicely in the sandpit with 1 or 2 or 3 other organisations in delivering the project that this grant will fund. What's really important is that you think about who you're going to partner with in terms of your existing relationship with them. Do you have common values? Do you already work well together? Do you see another organisation as a potential partner because they bring skills and expertise that your organisation doesn't have, but together you have a really strong team to deliver a project, and together you both see value in this project being delivered? And so you might have different needs of the project, but you're prepared to support them and they're prepared to support you, and your project will get potentially funding and get off the ground. It's really valuable to spend a bit of time getting to know your partner's agenda expressing your agenda and making sure that you can work together, even though those things might be different. You'd often put together an MOU. So a bit of an understanding around who is the lead organisation. So the lead is ultimately the person that will sign the contract with the funding body. They'll receive the money. They'll have to disperse money and pay the bills as the project gets rolled out. They get to share money with their partners. That is the biggest area of dispute that we find in organisations that go into partnerships, is that the lead organisation gets the money and then isn't very forthcoming at them wanting to share it with the partners. And that sets up a lot of tension, and projects can get very ugly very quickly if you haven't worked out how that money will be distributed and who gets what for and when and for doing what body of work. The budgets is often a bit of a trick, because I think for any business, if you're used to doing projected budgets and having a best guess, then doing a budget for a project is a very similar process. You have a best guess of how much time it will take, so what your wages might be, what volunteer staff you might have that can contribute, what expertise you might have to buy in. You know, is your website up to the job? Does your social media support your project? Do you have the expertise, or do you need technical expertise or subject matter experts that you have to pay for? You can get a sense of what you already can or can't do. You'll have to get some quotes if you want to buy in expertise, or if you need to buy in materials or resources. You'll get some quotes, and often grants come out and you might have 2 weeks notice that the grant's due. If you're lucky, you've got 4 weeks notice. So it's a really, really quick turnaround. And this is why, if you've already done some work in your sort of working on your business phase, some of your strategic planning, you know what your projects are, you can have a really rough guide to a budget for these projects. You know, you might have done it 6 months ago, but it's still a really good starting point to update those numbers very quickly, and then get some quotes from people who you might have researched already. And you do know, if you're going to go ahead with a project, you've got 1, 2 or 3 people in mind that you're going to call in on, who will give you a quote for the purposes of your grant application, on the understanding that if the grant goes ahead, they may or may not then get the job. Because if the grant goes ahead, you might quickly go out to tender and seek 2 or 3 quotes and get the best quote for the money you've got. So that's a bit of housework that you can do in advance. Also know that when you make assumptions in your budget, often the funding bodies want to know what your assumptions are. So if you're suggesting that you're going to spend $10,000 on materials, but you know in these times we have challenges with our ports and with importing product, and that those prices might go up 10% over the life of your project, put that assumption into your grant application. Let the funding body know. You can guarantee that the person looking at your project budget knows how to read a budget, knows how to budget for a project. And if you're missing really obvious assumptions, or you're trying to bluff them and make it sound like it's really good value, they're just going to think that you don't know what you're talking about. They're not going to go, yippee, this person can do this project 50% cheaper than the next application. They're going to go, no, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. The assessors know what things cost. They know where budgets can go wrong. They know how difficult it is to make projections, and they know you make projections based on certain assumptions. So let the funding body know that you know budgets as well as they do, and that you've put forward a very realistic view to what this project's going to cost you. And in line with that, and you're talking about how well you're delivering this budget, show as best you can how the project that you're being funded to deliver perhaps fits needs beyond your business and the funding body's needs. So does it fit with some sort of regional strategy? Does it fit with your local council's strategy for business in the region? So you might be one cog in the wheel, but one cog of many that collectively actually achieve a really good outcome beyond your business. Also show how you might share what you learn in your project, and in some way share that back with your local council through businesses in your area or businesses in your industry. You might put together some online resources. The people are really interested in funding projects that go a little bit further and that fund a project that's then sustainable. You absolutely want to make sure in your budget that you're putting in place the steps you need for the outcomes of this project to have a life beyond the funding stream. Organisations are very sick of funding projects that operate when the funding exists and then stop regardless of demand. They want to see that you're putting in some sustainability measures. And that may not be the full project, but it's some foundation work, or it's getting you to the next step, which means now you're leveraging that next step and you're going to the next step again. Make sure that that's really clear and make sure your budget stacks up for that sort of sustainability to be built in. One of the other things you have to do, and we're not even really at the writing stage yet, is to think about how you're going to manage your success, measure success. So how are we going to evaluate your project? Can you realistically do that within the workload of the project? You don't make it another big job. Make sure that you've got milestones throughout your project, that you're ready to report both during or at the end of your project, and that you're ready to resource doing that acquittal as well. Once you've done all that thinking and you've got your grant, you're actually ready to start writing. And this is where you think, often you think this is now the tricky bit, but if you've done all of this preparation work, by the time you get to writing your grant, you're really well prepared and you're really clear about your project and what your funding body's likely to hear. The biggest thing with writing is to be honest. Don't pretend you can do something that you can't. Don't pretend that you've got better skills than you've got. Don't pretend it will be easy if it won't. The funding bodies, essentially, they want to trust you. They want to look at your application and trust that you will use this money well, that you'll put it to a good purpose. They want to see that you've delivered projects really well before, that you've got a really good team, you've got a really good experience in this space, and that you've got some good history that you can leverage, that you've potentially got some good relationships or some good partners, and that together you can do this really well. They want to trust that the project will be delivered as you've said it will be, and it will be done on time. It is really difficult for funding bodies to manage people who don't start on time, who don't finish on time, who don't acquit, who say they'll do one thing and then go, oh, no, we can't. Can we change our plans? You can put in variations, but it doesn't do you too many favours. So be really clear as much as you can. Be sure that you identify the risks and how you're going to manage them. This is another area that the assessors know what risks are. They will probably read your project brief of first 50 words and immediately know some of the risks that they'll be looking for. And you need to make sure in your application that you've talked to those risks, that you've identified them, and you've shown how you're going to mitigate them. Don't pretend really obvious risks don't exist. You'll just look like you don't know what you're talking about. But you can turn them into a positive by saying, we believe this is a risk, but this is what we have done to mitigate that risk. So we understand we're reliant on a certain number of people to do the job. We've got certain people we can reallocate within our workforce. We have some consultants or contractors who work for us that if we need to, we can pull in quickly. They're familiar with our organisation, or we've got a partnership with an organisation that is only expecting to provide, say, the equivalent of one EFT, but if need be, they have 3 or 4 EFT that we can draw on. Show that you can solve your human resource needs, and you do that throughout the project. Don't waste your words. Tammy does a lot of our writing, and Tammy has a really great way of looking at the question that you're being asked, which is, do you have expertise? And Tammy's first statement in the response will be, we are brilliant. Not quite. We have extensive expertise in this area. we have had experience doing this, this, and this. When we did this, we got this outcome. When we did this, we got this outcome. When we did this, we got this outcome. And in one paragraph, you're immediately going, wow, these people are great. And then you might have 2 or 3 other paragraphs to still flesh out a little bit more around, yes, not only did we do these projects with these great outcomes, we also did it within this sector, and we did it at this stage of our business development and this stage of our business development, and we've done it with a partner and we've done it without partners. And your word count in grant applications typically could be 50 words, 250 words, 500 words. If you're really, really lucky, you might get 1,000 words. When you try and answer a criteria question around, tell us how brilliant you are, and you've got 250 words to do it in, you really want to cut to the chase. We are exceptionally good in this area. And here's my proof, this example, this example, this example. And we've done it in this sector, and we've done it in these areas of business growth, and we've done it with these partners. Really convey that message very quickly. The reader doesn't want lots of adjectives. They don't want you to be very flowery in your language. You know, this is not a poem, it's not a novel. You're not trying to occupy somebody for the next hour. They really do want to read your text and in 10 minutes be convinced that you are a good candidate for this money. It's also important that you don't assume that the reader knows anything about your business, your location, your sector, your expertise. They don't know acronyms. You need to use a language that an 8-year-old could read and would make sense of, that the language flows, it's very simple, there's no jargon, there's no industry in-speak. The best way you can test that is to get somebody who knows nothing about you to read some of your application and ask them if they know what you're asking for or what you're talking about. There are some great online tools that you can use as well that help you with your tone and check your spelling, check your grammar. It's really annoying if you're trying to assess a grant application and you feel like you want to break out the red pen and just correct all the spelling mistakes. And it's when you're writing, you might write 3, 4, 5, 6 different iterations of the same 250 word answer. You stop seeing what you're writing. You must get other people to check it. And particularly, if you're writing for the first time or if English is not your first language, get somebody else to double check and make sure that anything that might trip up a reader and confuse them, or if your reader has to think about what your sentence is saying, you have to rewrite that sentence. And so another person to help you with that is Fabulous. Also think about the funder's language. So if they talk about a particular, if they name businesses small business, or if they talk about an organisation, or if they talk about an enterprise, use their language, because you want to make it easy for the assessor to know what you're saying. So use the language and the words that they use to describe types of organisation or the type of project that you're going for or the type of outcomes that you want to achieve. Don't make up your own language. Don't use what's fashionable for you. Use what the funding body uses. And if you need to, you might say, we have grouped all of these things and we're going to refer to them as the activity or the entity or the brand of this consortia. Give it a name so that you're using 1 or 2 words and can not having to use up lots of words describing each time what this consortia of 5 people is actually that consortia. And the reader knows you've got 5 people involved in that. You also want to keep in mind that the funder wants value for money. They want benefits that last, that are sustainable, but they want value for money. So you need to show how you're putting in a little bit extra or doing a little bit more with that money. And that can be as much as sharing what you learn with other businesses in your area or your sector. It might be that you're creating jobs It might be that you're able to grow your business, which means you'll be more sustainable and the jobs that you've got are more secure. It could be that you're entering into a new market. Government at the moment loves jobs, export, any economic benefit. And so you need to keep that in mind, that you need to keep reminding the reader that you're adding a lot of benefit into this space. In most of the grants as well, when you come to write them, we more often than not now upload your application online. That most online platforms will have fillable boxes online. Write your responses in a Word document that you can edit, that you save, that you can keep over time. And then once it's written in that Word document and you're happy with it, you can then copy and paste your response into the online box and check that all the words fit. Don't believe for a moment that when the instructions tell you you've got 250 words, that you will have 250 words. We did an application the other week and it was 232. Don't ask us why, but it was 232. So we knew beforehand, and we tested the online portal, we checked the word counts, we knew that we couldn't write 250 words. We knew we would have to write less, so we were prepared for that. So as we write grants, we do it in a Word document. We can share that with our clients. They can respond. We can make quite a few updates to the responses. During the grant writing process, we get content into the online platform to test the word count. We test the formatting. Sometimes the online platform will allow you to bold and do paragraphs and use dot points, and sometimes they won't. So you need to know that you're laying out your responses without formatting, because the online platform will just eradicate it. Or if you try and do formatting, it will exchange your format with all sorts of bizarre symbols that actually then make no sense and distract the reader. So test your online platform, do your work in Word first, copy and paste it in. Don't get head up about formatting, but if you can upload extra diagrams, make sure they're really succinct. But a diagram that sets out really clearly the stages in your project or what your project will achieve, that's a fantastic. Visuals really help tell your story, and they aren't burdensome for your assessor to read them as well. So think about your attachments if you're allowed any, often you're not. Think about the way that you will make your online content readable and keep it really succinct. Support your claims. If you say we can do this or we have done that, add a sentence or two to justify that that's the truth. Make sure that's really understood. Before you hit send, spell check, grammar check, check the online platform. Most platforms will allow you to enter content and save and then go back into the platform. Not all of them will, but we really suggest that you get content up as early as you can to check the platform, then get your accurate content up at least, if you can, 2 or 3 days ahead of the due date. Check that when you then enter all your data and save, exit the online portal and come back in, that all your data is still there, because sometimes it's not, and that all your attachments are still there. When you are ready to submit, we highly recommend that you push submit and get your application in at least 24 hours before the due date. You can guarantee if you leave it to the last day, everyone else has done that as well, and the server goes down, you lose internet for the day, your computer decides to do an update and you're stuck for an hour and the deadline passes, that you decide, you read, you think you've read all the fine print, and then the online application has a quirk that wasn't in the instructions, and all of a sudden you need an extra attachment, or you've got to tick a box and you haven't got that information to hand. Ideally, if you've checked all that beforehand, then you'll know that. But again, we did a grant recently that the instructions said all this particular financial information was required. And when you entered that information, another box ticked up that said, yep, and we want this as well. and you couldn't progress without it. So we again had plenty of time, but we could go and scramble and get that additional information as well. So you never know what the online platform is going to do. And often it can be quite different from the instructions that you're given. So get it in early and make sure you don't get those IT hassles. Make sure you're confident of using the technology and have somebody there to back you up if you do need help. And then the last bit, just sort of quickly, is if you're successful, you then have to do it. So you'll get contracts to sign, and the contracts generally are a lot of pages of fine print that you get to read and sign and commit to doing what you said you would do at certain milestones. Money will come in, but not necessarily in line with your costs. So you need to have thought through your cash flow and how you will fund getting this project started and funded if you don't get the money exactly when you need it. So you do need a cash flow plan as part of that. You'll also have to acquit. And so you will need to make sure that you know what the acquittal report looks like, that you're collecting the information that you need as you deliver your project, and that you're ready to get that report in on time, because that's the sort of thing that a funding body will be very pleased about and then is more likely to fund you again, as opposed to if they're going to chase you for milestone reports or quotes or evidence of the project being delivered and the acquittal report, they're not going to jump on trying to give you money again in the future. If you're not successful, then seek feedback. Get as much feedback as you can about your application. And funding bodies are a little bit different in terms of how much they will support you. It might be a brief email. It might be you can make a phone call. Often what will happen if you seek feedback, if you get a chance to talk to somebody, the chances are that they will give you some fairly genuine feedback and often quite well considered feedback. And make sure you take notes, record all of that as much as you can, and rehash your application. Doing that in the first instance just helps you improve your writing, but also if you've got an idea or a project that you really want to deliver, make the improvements while the feedback's fresh, and then have it sitting there, because the chances are there will be another grant round, either of the same funding stream or a different grant round that your project fits to. And then it's so much easier to then rework your application, improve it based on your feedback, improve it based on your own skill to write a grant and knowing what your funding body's after, and give it a go again. There's no reason why you can't keep reapplying for funding. But if you're applying 3 or 4 times for the same thing and you're not getting funded, something's wrong. So you might need to go out and get some assistance to understand, is it the project's just not what funding bodies want to fund? Whether you're trying to fit a project, a round project into a square hole, that it just doesn't align with the grant you're going for. If it's something about the way you're writing your grant. So it's, too many words, it's off the track, it's what you're passionate about, not what the funding body's passionate about. If you're saying we can do it, but you can't prove that you can, if your budget's a bit dodgy, if there are risks you haven't identified, these are the things that the funding body will say, yeah, look, it was a great idea, but you didn't address this, this, and this. Make sure you do. And then as much as possible, give grants a go, in part to get the experience of looking through the grant documents, getting skillful at writing a grant, getting all of your organisational information together to start with. So you'll find with so many grants, they will ask about your organisation, they'll ask about your human resources, they'll ask about your financial status, they'll want to know what you've done, what your expertise is, what outcomes you've achieved. They'll want to know that you're financially sound, that you've got good governance or strategic and operational processes in place. This is generic for all grants. So you can write a couple of grants, and even if you do all that generic tell me about you type questions, then you're going to have a really good resource of information where you can pick and choose some of the best statements around your organisation as it fits to that particular project and grant application that you're applying for. So we highly suggest that you do practice writing about yourself a lot. And that's usually the trickiest part, is telling people how good you are. You know, most people can write about their project, but people can't say, yeah, I'm great at this. Well, now's a really good time to start practicing, and take the opportunity to, you know, share that information around and get others to critique it. Then when you come to write a grant, you're halfway there. And one of the trickiest parts is done for you already. So we would suggest practicing is a really good place to start. That's a very quick overview, and some of your questions that were asked in the RSVPs before we started have, I hope, been answered within that, but not necessarily all of them. So I'd suggest we go over to you and any questions that you've got.
Sue, we've had one question come through in the private chat, and that is, can I get a grant to start a new business?
Yeah, probably not. Most funding bodies, and certainly when you're looking at government doesn't want to fund you to start a business. If you've got an idea, if you're passionate about your business, the expectation is that you'll do your business planning, you will have the cash to get started. Business Victoria and Small Business Mentoring Service and your local government, so in this instance with City of Whittlesea, if you look at all their websites, there's some extraordinary resources made available to help you understand business startup, to know all the things that you need to do. And the expectation is that you will take that advice and you'll do it, and that you will have the money to start. Small businesses used to be funded to start, and it was not successful. It didn't provide a payback for government, so they stopped doing it. Typically, you need to have been in business a year, not always, but typically at least a year, have good financials, have some good solid policies and practices in place, and show that you are ready to grow, or you're ready to really establish some solid foundations before you will find a grant that's relevant to you. Okay, any other questions?
Okay, the other question we have is, I've already started my project, can I get a grant?
No. Grants do not fund anything that you've already started, and you'll find pretty much in every grant criteria, there is no such thing as funding in arrears, that you will be required to put in a grant application, and if you are successful, then your grant will fund all the work that comes from the moment you sign your contract and you receive your funding. That is what the grant will fund. There's no going backwards. So if you've started your project and you want to go for a grant, then write in your application your project as being in, 1, 2, 3, even 4 stages. And you can say, here is the project, this is what I want to achieve in the end game. And I'm at stage 1 at the moment, and I'm now going for grant to do stage 2. And make sure that stage 2 doesn't need to start until the grant comes through. And that's the only way you'll get around having started a project and not being able to finish the, get yourself out of trouble from funding something that has already started.
Thanks, Sue. And I'll just, Sue hasn't been able to see the chat, so I'll just update Sue on what we have been talking about behind the scenes. And the question was put up, how do you present to the assessors that you're a solid investment when you're just starting out with writing grants? Because we talked about mentioning how great you are, highlighting how some of the experience that you've had. What we need to do here is, if the funding application allows you to submit a letter of support, that's great, go and get a letter of support, but you'll find that nowadays not many applications ask for those or even allow those. A lot of the online applications will only allow you 1, 2 or 3 attachments, and they'll specify exactly what those attachments are. So if you can have a letter of support, make sure you get one, and Council's Economic Development Unit is a good place to start with that. Where you can't provide a letter of support, consider providing your strategic plan. Now, your organisation should have a strategic plan. This doesn't have to be a massive document. It could be a one-page strategic plan that just outlines what your mission is, your purpose, and what your goals are for 2020 or 2021. And make sure that the project for which you're asking for money is listed in that strategic plan. And then attach that. If you can't attach that, make sure you've still got it and put it up on your website, if you've got a website, because they will go and have a look for your organisation. I hope that's helpful. Now, you're welcome to unmute yourself and answer any questions and provide us with any questions.
And don't be shy.
Hi, Mike, Cameron Drain here. I guess there would be some people on here that not just small to medium-sized enterprise, but small business. And the concept of strategic plans and the like is probably very foreign to them. Can you talk maybe about that and really keeping it real, being pragmatic about what a business of that size can do to still meet some of this criteria?
Sure. And you're quite right. Strategic plans used to be a novel. And it used to be, if you had a 40-page strategic plan, it was a really good one. Now we realise that a really good strategic plan is possibly one page, and that it's a funding body may want to see that you have given thought to the strategic directions, the priorities of your organisation, but they do not want to read very much. And so a one-pager might have really about your the purpose of your organisation or the nature of your organisation. And even a for-profit business has a purpose. You have a purpose to build widgets or to provide certain services or whatever that is. So what is your organisation? The values of your organisation, the key priorities. You might have 3, 4 or 5. More than 5 key priorities in an organisation is just too big and too cumbersome. So get really clear around what matters most. And then under those key priorities, you might have 2, 3, 4 key actions that you will aim to deliver on. So this is quite high level, and you might aim to achieve those directions and reach certain goals within 1, 2 or 3 years. It's very difficult to plan beyond 3 years. Now, organisations do, you do have a sense of in 5 years, in 10 years, whatever, this is where I want to be, but we really don't know what the world will look like. So if you can do a one-pager that's very high level, a little bit about the organisation, its purpose, what it does, its whether it's its mission, its values, its vision, and then the 3 to 5 key strategic directions, 2, 3, 4 key activities, that's enough for your reader to go, okay, there's good consideration here. There's something around the foundation. There's some areas of growth. And behind all of that information, you've got all your research and the detail of how you're going to deliver it, but you don't need to attach all that detail. Rarely would you need to attach all that detail. And when you do business planning, typically what we do with organisations is get them to think really broad about the opportunities and the potential and what their business could do, and then narrow it down into, so what actually aligns best with what they want to achieve, what their audience needs from them or would want to pay for them, what's most realistic in terms of their size and their resources and the money that they've got, and then narrow it down to get to just 1 or 2 that they focus on now. Keep everything else as a memory, and in 12 months' time, you might come back to it and go, wow, we're actually ready now to do the next thing. But bring it back to 1, 2, 3 things that you really can do now and focus on that. And then all of this big information gets pushed aside and you've got 3 things to go on your one-pager, and then how you're going to do that is where you focus. So it is achievable, but yeah, you do a lot more thinking and writing and research than you'll actually get onto the one page, and that's fine.
Thank you.
I might just,
And-
if you don't
sorry,
mind, if you'd like to get help with your ideation and just sort of, you know what your operations are, you know what you do day by day, it's what you do, you know it really well. If you wanted to take it up to a higher level and explain and speak in the vernacular of the grants assessors, I do recommend that you book in for a mentoring session, because in that mentoring session, you can actually sit down with the mentor and just talk very, very casually about what your business is. And from their expertise, they'll be able to draw out those higher level goals, and they'll be able to explain to you really how you can do that one-page strategic plan. So again, we've got those resources online.
And if I may, Cameron's asked a really great question. One of the things we said early on in the webinar is that grants should bring forward a project that you've already identified. If you see a grant in the paper or you come across it online, don't invent a project just to apply for that grant. You'll find it really difficult and you'll get caught out. So that's where in your strategic plan or business plan, you've already identified the directions you're heading in or what your clear goals are. And then that will back up why it is you're applying for this grant. So you might have in that business plan, we intend to extend our reach or extend our footprint across to southern New South Wales. And then that way, when you're applying for the grant, it's for extra marketing assistance. You can highlight, because for a long time now, we've been thinking about expanding our footprint into southern New South Wales. So that's where you're backing up what it is that you're doing, and you're able to show that you put a lot of thought into it.
Thank you. All good advice.
Any other questions? Feel free to unmute and ask away.
Well, while we're waiting, I will share with you something to keep in mind. As Sue said, when we're writing grants, we usually pull the questions out of the online form and put it into a Microsoft Word document and answer all the questions in there. And make sure that you submit that application when it's ready and you've had it double checked by someone. Make sure you submit it ideally 24 hours before the deadline, because the odds are something will go wrong. Either you'll suddenly lose your internet, or you'll discover you've read the question wrong, or as we found out only last week, when you cut and paste that question across, the word count is different. They've said it's 250 words and you discover it's 232 words, and you've got to spend time rewriting that question. One of the other things that you might get tripped up on every now and then is they'll say 250 words and they mean 250 characters. And so it's really hard to distill 250 words down to about 2 sentences. But if you discover that error on the form, you've got to act quickly. And if you're looking forward to submitting your application 24 hours beforehand, there's no need to stress. You've got plenty of time to get that done. But you'll come across those. And if there's one message I could also add today, and that is, if you're unsuccessful, it's really important that you don't act negatively or say anything improper about the funding body, about the council, about the government or the philanthropic body you've applied for funding from. We see people sometimes, they're unsuccessful, so they might have a bit of a rant on Facebook, or, you know, this government agency doesn't understand small business, they haven't funded us, and that you can feel that anger. What they're doing is they're making sure that they won't be successful in future. You've really got to take it with a grain of salt, ring up the assessors and find out why you haven't been successful, take it on the chin, rehash your application and apply another time. Getting angry and I guess going to the press with some negative input about that funding body isn't going to help you in any way whatsoever. Okay, we have, we're happy to take as many questions as you want, and we've also added the flyer to our website and we've sent through a copy on the chat. And Cameron's added another really, really great point to the chat, and that is that we need to be vigilant. People may see grants as money for nothing when in fact it's an investment, and that's correct. Mostly it's government grants, so that's taxpayer funding that's being inserted into your business. So you've got to make it work and you have to demonstrate how you've spent that money. When you acquit that grant, the government or the council may come back to you and ask for evidence as to where that money did go to. You could get audited. So certainly it's not money for nothing. You do need to show what you've done with that money. And we said earlier on, and I'm conscious of time, but if your project involves building something or creating something, make sure, even if it's holding meetings, make sure you take photos or video, and that way you can demonstrate to the funding body that that thing was built, that event did occur. Absolutely. So you're not just relying on yourself writing a sentence to say we did exactly what we said we'd do. So we'll just wrap up now if we have no further questions. Rebecca, Sue, thank you very much for your time today. Everyone who's come along, thank you very much. And thank you for the questions and for the active chat as well. We hope that this has been helpful for you. Best wishes with applying for your grants. If you're unsuccessful, just apply again, ask for feedback and apply again. And the Council's Economic Development Unit, these are such valuable people with a lot of skills and knowledge that you can tap into. And especially when it comes to small business grants, they know small business and they've got all the stats for the City of Whittlesea that will help you pinpoint how your business is essential in that local government area. So make sure you keep in touch with them. If you haven't met with Rebecca, you should give her a call or send her an email anyway, and make that contact. So thank you everyone for coming along today, and we hope that you've found today helpful and a bit of fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.